Hello, and welcome back to another episode of They Don't Teach This in Law School. I'm your host, Charley Mann of Law Firm Alchemy and Red Kraken Creative, and I have with me of also Law Firm Alchemy and Red Kraken Creative, my buddy, my friend, my collaborator and co-writer, one of the awesome people who helps gets this podcast published every single week and also handles work for clients at Red Kraken Creative as a fantastic writer, Bryan Austin. Bryan, great to have you on the show, my friend.
Thanks, dude. Hi, everybody. Good to see you all again. I think
Yeah,
this is the
yeah.
first time you and I have caught up since I took over the reins briefly and ran with it.
Yes, yes. So prior to that,
Yeah.
we had a couple of collab episodes that we did. Then you did some solo episodes. And for everyone who really enjoyed those solo episodes, I have great news. We're going to be putting Bryan in on some more solo episodes because it seems like that ground up perspective of someone who's still learning in this space, who's, earlier with some of these principles that many of you, maybe it's an earlier journey for you. And I think even for the people who have been on this journey for a while, it's actually really helpful for them to hear that ground up what it was like from the beginning perspective. And we're going to talk a ground up project here on the podcast today as we answer ye age old question, what's the one thing they don't teach you in law school? And in this case, we're talking about how to write and publish a book, because we did that this year, Bryan.
We did that. It's on my shelf, Charlie.
Look
It's
at
looking
that.
at me right in the face. It's like my little monkey paw.
You know what I realized just the other day, Bryan, is, and this is sort of embarrassing and astonishing, I currently have no copies of my own book in my house because I keep giving away whatever copy I have on me when I hang out with people, or even just seeing family members. If it happens to be in a backpack, I'm giving them away. So it doesn't matter how many copies I keep in my house, I keep giving them away to folks, which, that's okay.
I think somewhere in there, Charlie, is a metaphor for who you are as a person, but it's also kind of a brilliant marketing strategy. If every book you treat like yours and like write from the individual library of Charlie Mann, this is my most prized copy. And then you hand it to somebody and they're like, wow, Charlie really, really likes me.
Until all
So
those
yeah,
people get together at some point and they go, this feels like a facade. This feels like
wait
no,
a
all of your
minute.
copies at one point or another were my individual copy.
Look at that literary Lothario. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, the subtext of this episode is we write books and so can you. Because
Yes.
in the scope of we're fast approaching almost that 2-year mark, but in the scope of a year, we went from not having a book to being best-selling authors, which still to me is pretty surreal.
Yeah.
Now you've had a lot of time chewing on this. What's the one thing they don't teach you in law school? You found incredible avenues and gaps in people's journeys and educations and have shown them better ways, better paths, and better strategies. I'm still new into that chewing on it. Still wrapping my head around what they do teach in law school to figure out what they don't teach. But what's so lovely about working on the podcast, working on the book, is you begin to see a common thread. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say what they don't teach in law school is the confidence in your capability. I heard a lot of stories from people in law school who feel they're competing against an incredibly high bar. They're competing for only a certain set of seats at the table.
Mm-hmm.
Set and fixed in their not enoughness. Now, what does this do as a lawyer? You come as the most informed person in the room. You come as the most clever person in the room. But I think something that I realized both in the process of writing this book and looking at that niche in law school is the confidence in one's capability to do something, to make something. I was sitting last night, Charlie, and randomly I got home from work and
I hope you intentionally got home from work. I hope it wasn't a random getting home from work.
No, it was random. Sometimes I land there and I'm like, why am I in these funny clothes? Like, it's always the end of a time travel movie when I get home from work.
Yeah. For those who are curious, who haven't heard Bryan on the podcast before, he's also the interpreter of James Madison at Colonial Williamsburg.
Yeah. But I randomly sat and was like, you know what I'm going to do for 20 minutes? I'm going to play some music. And I plucked out some notes. I tried to figure out some things by ear. And then eventually, I was like, okay, I'm hitting that point where I'm too terrible at this. I'm going to hang it up. And I was talking to a friend later that day, and I was like, "Yeah, I did this for a little bit, and like I'm not really good at it. It was silly, you know." And they kind of they checked me and they said, "Well, you still did it. You did it for your own joy." And I was like, "Wow, that's really great." Now, as artists, Charlie, we were taught, monetize every skill. If it's not sellable, if it's not something that's presentable, you don't do it. You don't, everything goes back into your craft and your business. And I think that looking at this book and kind of thinking about what we were talking about before of the lesson you've taken, which is everyone should be writing books about their shared experiences. Everyone should be sitting and documenting their journey and packaging that as a product. It's someone's capability to be able to do it.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about the first portion of getting the book together, because there was before Bryan and then during Bryan, right? Those are our major eras. And the biggest chunk is like working with you on it. But the book, for years, it has been a desire of mine to have a published book. I mean, more than a decade. I wanted to be a published author, right? And as with many of these objectives, it's less about exactly, it didn't have to be the next great American novel. It didn't have to be the world's greatest business book. It needed to be what was right for me. And it turned out the path for me was going to be a collaborative path. I'm actually really excited that that's where it took it, because it represents, like a long mindset journey for me. Because artists, even though a lot of it is collaborative, often as an actor, you're trying to shine in your part because you want to get noticed for the next part, and so on and so forth. And this book, I had been creating the podcast for a while with my brother, and then transitioned and started the company law firm Alchemy. And Joe went on his own path and started doing these episodes of They Don't Teach Us in Law School. And I was alternating, or actually at that point, it was double episodes each week, which just turned out to be kind of unsustainable, not really the path that excited me with the podcast. But there was the guest episode, and early on I had folks like Jan Roos, Spada, Stedman, a whole bunch of awesome people, Tim Summerroth, a lot of folks who would end up being the sort of co-conspirators, collaborators, contributors to this book, because we made them. We'll talk about that. And I was also recording solo episodes. So it would be a guest episode on Tuesday, solo episode on Friday. And part of the intention early on was indeed the idea of, I may be writing my book by talking it out. Speaking of Tim Summerroth, I want to shout out this episode for Tim, because the reason we're really recording this and putting this down here is because Tim asked me about this after a Genesis, or during really a Genesis mastermind meeting, about, how did we publish the book? I said, you know what, Bryan and I will do a whole episode about this. We'll talk about this. So we'll be pretty technical in this process. And indeed, we will also wander into the esoteric and abstract, as we are wont to do. But what happened is over time, it became very clear that this could be a book. And knowing that I wanted to publish a book, there were sort of two options. I could indeed write one from the ground up. And I actually have a couple of books that are from the ground up projects. I just haven't taken over the finish line for reasons that would be a whole other podcast episode. Interesting, complex reasons, yada, yada. I love a teaser, especially one that probably will never pay off in a future episode. That's okay. So it could be a ground up project, write it from the ground up, or look at this treasure trove of materials. Why not create a book that has a ton of collaborators? Now, here's where we got to the other issue. There was the simple version of, let's just get a bunch of transcripts together, call it a book. Voila, it's a book. As much as there's part of me that would love to just do the quick and dirty version on something like that. We even talked about maybe we'll just get it cleaned up by a general purpose editor. It still felt like that's not quite a book. And so at that point, we started thinking about, and at that point, I had Eiffel, my executive assistant. I had Jenny Sedera, my program director, and now my co-founder at Red Kraken Creative on the team. And we wanted something a little bit more intentional. And so we were thinking, why don't we get like a ghostwriter type to forge all of this? Now, you and I, Bryan, have known each other for decades.
Yeah, decades.
We now get to say literally decades.
We can say a full score of years.
That's right. Yeah, at least. And I knew at the time that you were sort of like in between places. And I've known you to be, you know, a talented artist. I've seen you as a performer and a little bit as a writer. And I thought, hey, you know, it might be cool. What if Bryan could handle this project? And I remember being on the phone with you, Bryan, and talking about this project and the possibility for it. And you were just going to do this as like a freelance piece for us. We'd pay you a lump sum, taking the book over the finish line. That would be like your individual responsibility with Law Firm Alchemy. And I remember, Bryan, that you and I had a conversation in which we were, as, again, friends for a long time, we were going to talk about the money aspect of it, right? That was the most complicated thing. And by the way, if you are part of like the Genesis Mastermind or Catalyst, and you want to ask how much like got paid and everything, you can reach out to me directly. We're not going to air it over like public broadcast here. But if you're within the Law Firm Alchemy universe, you can reach out and I'll tell you numbers. But you and I were having a conversation, and what I told you on the phone was, hey, here's the thing. I have a number that I'm willing to do. I want to know what number you want. And I promise you that if my number is higher, I will give you my number. That is my promise to you. You named a number that was about almost 40% less. It's true to my word. I gave you the real number, right? And by the way, thank goodness, because it was a complicated process. You earned every dollar of that contract, to say the least, and then some. And by the way, and then some, we paid additional on top of it because there were complications along the way. So your role and responsibility was going to be, you know, you were going to forge the text into something that looked not like transcripts, but more narrative or more prose, well, an actual book. You are also going to reach out to the contributors and collaborators and get their permission to use their materials. Because when I was recording the podcast, it's not like I told them before the episode, hey, this might become a book. I think we only had 1 or 2 people ultimately not participate. Is that correct?
It's not that they did not participate. It's that there were just some major tweaks and we were past a deadline. So their participation sort of got pushed back to volume 2 when we do it. Because we one of the bedrocks of the process was making sure, 1, it was in a narrative voice that was cohesive, and 2, that our contributors, we were not only ghostwriting a book, we were ghostwriting for contributors as well. So making sure that the things that they had to say, they felt they could put their name on it. And so it was, I don't know that we had any outright refusals. I think what we ended up with at the end was someone sat and said, for this to be in my voice, I really need it to be this. And we really wanted to stand on that principle. And we said, yeah, great. Let's hold on to it for another book.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I do remember that back and forth. And that was a case in working with collaborators and contributors, which really on us in many ways, because we sort of sprung it upon people like, hey, do you want to be part of a book? And oh, by the way, now you're going to be part of our editorial calendar, which isn't something that you as a contributor need to stay massively updated on, but there will come trigger points in which deadlines have passed. In this case, we had sort of a parliamentary consent deadline early on that was like, hey, we're going to get this. You've agreed to participate in the project. We're kind of going to get this up to this point, at which point we're pretty locked in minus minor edits. And if you don't say anything, we're just going to go ahead with it because we'll have emailed stuff to you. You've already responded positively to participating in the past. And then in this case, someone, like you said, came in past the deadline and we had to hold true. Like we can't hold, this was already a hurry up and wait process. If you're going to publish a book in this way where you have a lot of contributors, which if you have a podcast, I really recommend doing this. I do genuinely recommend pursuing this path and turning your podcast into a book. I think it's a fantastic way to become a published author. It helps, obviously, that we had episodes that were solo episodes just in my voice. So we had this rotation of chapters and there was a through line of my voice opposite all of these guests or all these contributors, these collaborators. And my preferred term for it was collaborators, because I see each of these people as having authorship within the book. And that would become part of the launch plan for the book as well. And we'll get there. But for you, Bryan, as you were forging this material, like what were some of the things that you were thinking about having to contend with in order to shape the book?
Yeah. First, I want to really celebrate your use of the verb forge because it sounds so cool. Like you're making it sound like Tony Stark in the first Iron Man. Like I'm just sitting in a cave with all these pages and my arms are sweaty. That's what it looked like. That's totally
Mom
what
spaghetti.
it looked like. Mom spaghetti.
Sorry.
It's just, how dare you? So I think I want to take circle back to that phone call, because I remember exactly where I was. I remember the phone call. And I think I want to kind of give the first constructive takeaway to our John Doe who's sitting and contemplating, should I write a book? Because I remember underappraising my skills. I remember sitting and apologizing for what I had to say and apologizing for my artistry. And that's obstacle number one that you have to get over when you sit and say, you know what, I'm going to write a book, is sitting and being grounded in the confidence of the things that I have to say are worth hearing. The things that I do are worth being compensated well for. Because you very easily could have sat and nodded and said, great, Bryan, yeah, I can get you for the price that you're naming.
Yeah.
And, you know, that was.
But let me from the person who was like employing the writer, let me add this perspective. If I had done that deal, the book would not have been what it was. There would have, because literally for the sake of your sanity and the more time you spend on this, the weaker your dollar became, essentially, right? And there would have come a point where the dollar would have been essentially so weak and so tiresome for you that the project could have lingered more. It could have had all kinds of problems. I encourage people to pay well. I will say, I've heard how much it costs to publish books in other arenas, an avenue I may go down at some point. This was not, at least for me, was not an extraordinary cost. This feels like this is a win-win. This is a good mutual opportunity. It's a really solid lump sum for a friend that I've known for a long time. Feels like I'm compensating a writer well for a first time on a project where there's going to be learning involved as well. So we are dealing with like some stumbling here and there, but feels fair to everyone and recognizes what I expect to be the workload to get this across the finish line.
Yeah. So the process, the sort of heating up the forge, so to say, what it started as was incredibly abstract.
Mm-hmm.
All books start in abstract. I have an idea for a book. I have something to say. I haven't seen a book like this before. I have this story to tell. All art begins in abstraction and the abstract. That's where most ideas stay.
Mm-hmm.
What helped me and what made this process continue to sustain itself to where in a few short months we had a first draft
Mm-hmm.
is systems.
Mm.
Your idea in your book can be as abstract as possible if you have systems in place where something has to be produced. And shortly after I said, yeah, let's do it. Let me ghostwrite your book. Let's do this together. We had a meeting with you, with Eiffel, with Jenny, and we talked not only sort of the craft of writing it, we talked about sort of the systematic and operational deadlines.
Mm.
Where are you going to start? What do we need by this date? What do we need by this date? And we took this abstraction and then we incrementally whittled it down to little bite-sized chunks. So the first thing you said was, okay, I want these 3 chapters. Can you get me Jan? Can you get me Cassidy? I think the third one was a solo one for you.
Yes.
And
yes. It was 2 guests and a solo.
And I know what you did in hindsight. I don't think I realized it at the time. In just focusing on 3 chapters, you sat and you said, in this space of time, which was longer than the other ones, you're going to develop your voice. We're going to try things and see what works. We're going to test it out and figure out what this book sounds like for the rest of the book.
Yep. The most feedback in terms of multiple back and forths was absolutely in this first process. And I would take my iPad and take the chapters in PDF and I would do red markup on them. That was the thing that was working for me at the time. I would literally sit on my exercise bike and I would read the chapters and do red markup while just like slowly spinning the wheels on it. And that's how we did the first back and forth. And that was the most significant red penny. I mean, we'll talk about, you should hire someone else to handle the grammar thing. Don't have your ghostwriter be responsible for final grammar edits. It's too much. We had agreed on that ahead of time that was going to be something else that we would hire out for. We hired a company to handle that part of it. You were the creative forge, the creative smith of the book.
Yeah. And so that first pass, it was lovely because it was a conversation on, here's what I like. I hate my own choice. I hate this word. Don't use this word. And it was that. You hate the word that.
Yes.
So yeah. So for me it was, and it's been invaluable looking at the writing we do for Red Kraken Creative, because now
Mhm.
I'm learning those rules for other people. But you learn how this person thinks, how this person writes, how this person likes to express themselves. And that first pass, that was the most intensive. I remember sitting with you and Ivel and being like, yeah, we're not quite there. That's not quite what we need. And I remember I left that meeting, and that voice of resistance, to circle back to a book Tony
Mm.
Albrecht mentioned on your podcast a few months ago, From the Art of War. That resistance was so profound of, you're not the right fit for this. You have no business be doing this. Charley made the wrong choice. But I circled back, and I think I needed to give, I think I needed to either give a new take on those chapters with 3 more chapters. But it was the next big deadline, and it was really tight approaching. I was really chewing on this. I didn't have devoted writing time. I was writing during nap times. I was writing in the car. I
Not
think
during your nap times, your child's nap times, just to be just for clarity.
it's exclusively how I write, Charley. Don't judge my process. I'm sitting at the forge with my sleeping cap on, just snoozing on an anvil, and my toes are typing. That's not how I write. Yes, as my child was napping.
It created some imagery.
Words matter. It's an important distinction. And through all of that was the most difficult part of the process, because I was still learning my own creative systems. I was learning sort of the formula for it. And I remember I had a meeting. We had our second follow-up meeting, and you were like, yes, that's it. That's the book. And after those sort of first few fine-tuning meetings, that's really when we were off to the races. We had, here's your next deadline, here are the chapters I want. Here's your next deadline, here are the chapters we want. And those small bites slowly began to collate and produce this book, to where suddenly, we took this massive information, we whittled it into a more concentrated, condensed, massive information that, if you sort of put a forward, an introduction, and a closing chapter on it, bam, you got a book. And in the course
I
of
will say,
that,
actually, I want to mention in that, because that whole idea of like, hey, if we just book in this thing, we have a book. We did have discussions early on about, are there thematic through lines that we want to try and play with? How do we order the chapters? And at least as I recall, and I believe reflected in the finished product, there was not a lot put into that. There was not, because what we looked at was like, okay, these things could theoretically be put together. Maybe there's a through line over here. And at the end of the day, it just wasn't going to change how the book operated. Because the other thing is, and this is actually a really, really helpful point. If you are working with a writer to have your book written, it's the same as working with a graphic artist or with a tattoo artist. Give references. If you have not written a book already that you can hand over and say, this is my voice, this is the tone, texture, style, format, etc., that represents who I am in print, give reference points. And our reference point was, let's create the book Tools of Titans by Tim Ferriss for law firm owners. Tools of Titan is Tim Ferriss taking his podcast interviews. I'm not pretending to be an original here. This is how we came to the idea for this book, and turning those podcast interviews into a book, Tools of Titans, which is this big mammoth, like weapon level tome of information. You could kill someone with the size of this book. And that was helpful, because I was able to send you a copy of that book and say, look, we're not doing the same sort of Q&A individualized breakdown that he does for each of the, like if it's got Arnold Schwarzenegger in there and it's, there's a set of questions, et cetera, et cetera. Instead, we are going to have this be more of a flow to it. But that same idea of someone should be able to open this book and start in the middle of it, or someone should be able to open the chapter, the table of contents, and go, this is what is relevant to me today, is the vibe that we want for this, because it also best served the material that we had, right? It was a lot of chapters that had very different topics. So why force it? Because also, if we had gone through and said, let's do 7 marketing chapters in a row, at some point that would demand of us, okay, now we need to create transitions, right? If we're going to have all these marketing chapters in a row, how do we improve the flow overall? And it would have had this snowball effect That would have overwhelmed the process of writing the book instead of just staying true to the let's create the tools of Titans. By the way, one thing that I'm realizing, Bryan, is this is not going to be a one-part episode. This is good. We're going to be doing a two-part episode on this. So in this, we're going to get through a lot of this writing process and everything. What we'll do in the second episode is really talk about the publishing of the book, getting over the finish line, the marketing, yada, yada. So we'll just focus on the creative development of the book here.
Yeah, that's great. And I think what you're touching on is to circle back to that key theme of sort of the abstract becoming the concrete. That is letting go is part of that process. We had really big ideas at the beginning. One of the core things that we were like, yes, that's a cool idea, was we were going to make this a field guide. It was going to feel very practical, right? We're going to make the tools of Titans, and it's also going to be a field guide. And there's also going to be this thing. And so we were talking about graphics. We were talking about notes. We were, looking at all of these different things. None of that is in the book, because pretty late stage in the process, we sat and we realized we can either have the tools of Titans for law firm owners, or we can have this cool field guide idea that we really got married to. And at the end of the day, part of that creative process is being willing to let go in the name of specificity. Is figuring out what at the core is your product, because it doesn't need to be everything to all people. It just needs to be one really well done thing.
Yeah. I'm so glad you remembered that, because I know exactly where I was when we were having that discussion, when we had that moment of like, oh, it's like a Boy Scout manual, right? It's like a field guide. We could imagine the artwork, and there were versions of the cover early on where it was, a field guide for entrepreneurial law firm owners. And I mean, that maybe we'll actually, I'll tell that story real quick here, because it's such a good highlight of be open to creative feedback and be open to people helping you create clarity in what you're doing. I think that's the most important feedback that you can get from people. Is a lot of people will have ideas of how to make this more clever. It's the ideas of how to make it less clever that are often worth listening to. They are not as fun to listen to, because it's real fun to hear the next really clever idea. But when someone comes in and says, why don't we make this easier for someone to understand? You go, but I have this cool idea. I've invested in this field guide mentality, yada, yada. So we published on LinkedIn and on Facebook, I shared cover art for the book. And the intention was really help us refine our subtitle and decide which cover you really like. What I didn't realize is I was going to end up on the phone with my buddy, Seth Price of Blue Shark Digital, and Price Benowitz. He's been a guest on this podcast, a good friend. And Seth saw the post and he messaged me on Facebook, and he was basically like, I don't get it. What's up with this field guide thing? And my first reaction was kind of like to bristle, because what I love about Seth is he does bring this very like literal interpretation to things. He wants things, or maybe not wants, might be too extreme of a word, but he searches for things that have a little bit more clarity in how they message. Appreciate that about him, because then we just got on the phone. Like I messaged him back, and like 12 minutes later we're on the phone. I'm talking through all this stuff, and he's like, Charley, who's your audience for this? He's like, do you want your audience to be really broad or really narrow? I was like, well, I'm really focused on like entrepreneurial law firm owners. It's like, okay, sure. Is that going to be a big enough audience for your book? Or do you want this to also show up in college classrooms? Do you want this to be for the person who is thinking about becoming the entrepreneur? Like, his basic recommendation is, this is your first book. Let it go broad and winnow down your audience from there with, whatever filtration systems, people being on the email list, people following me on social media. Then the book can attract attention that drives people there. It's like, so, maybe this whole field guide concept, it's a little much. I said, well, what if we just like call it the name of the podcast? They don't teach this in law school. It's like, yeah, that's much better. I can see people actually picking up that book. I was like, daggone it. Email Kia Arian over at Zine Graphics, who handled our cover. Hey, Kia, this cover design that we've already been going back and forth in a nauseating number of emails about? We want to completely redo it. Same style, same like conventions of yellow and text colors and really simple Futura font, all that stuff. But we're going to take all the images off the front of the book, yada, yada, yada. And God bless Kia and Kim McCann on her team. fantastic people, loved working with them, for being willing to go like, okay, but this is your last one, all right?
Yeah.
And we dialed in what I think every time that I look at and yes, I do look at it, the list of Amazon bestsellers within our major categories, and I compare our cover to others, I am always happy with the decisions that we made for the simplicity. And think about that. This is actually a continuing theme here, is a project that we started out building up layers of complexity and ideas for, before pulling it back to its most clear and simple version that communicated what we wanted for the audience. And that came out of this chaotic process of writing. Now, Bryan, speaking of the writing process, when you were working with collaborators, I think this would be helpful for anyone who's thinking, can I turn my podcast into a book? What was some of the most helpful feedback you received from people? What was it like to work with folks who were really hands off in terms of how they wanted modifications made to their chapter? What did that actually look like?
So the best thing you can do in hindsight is getting it all on a Google Drive. Utilizing a Google Drive and
Central node.
a central node, and when you share it, inviting people to comment on it. Not just the contributors. You can choose to make maybe the contributors editors if you want, so they can go in directly. But it's a great way to get people's eyes on it and to collate what's the central feedback of it. I've learned that now. I didn't do that then. No, Charley. No.
We just sent PDFs.
I just had PDFs and
Word docs.
So I think what we did not do it piecemeal. I believe once we got everyone's sort of buy-in, we got a rough draft implemented, and then sort of the next sort of thing. We had a preliminary meeting with our publishers to kind of say, here's where we're working on. I think our original was like around July, we're going to release this book.
July, a year before we released it.
Yes, of July of 2024, we were going to have a book released, and we were confident, and we were so bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. Bushy-tailed. Our tails were so bushy. And once we had a preliminary first draft, we kind of went into sort of that first editing phase. So we went and sent all of the chapters to our contributors. And I did not have an Excel spreadsheet of who sent me what. I didn't have any of that. I just had my email address and my frequent recurrence to it to see if people had responded.
Let me drop in here, because I meant to make this point earlier. I think it's really important. If you are the author, if you are the me, Charley, of this process, don't manage the process. You are probably not good at it. I was not good at managing this process and laying down some standards of like, this is how you keep track of projects. Not my strength. Who is good at it? Jenny. When Jenny got involved, there can be this feeling sometimes of, from my position, like, I don't want to impose upon the artist, the writer, the co-author of this book. I don't want to impose on his creative process by adding things like deadlines and checklists and Excel spreadsheets, which the truth is it's super helpful. It's super helpful to know what you're working towards, when it's supposed to be done, and how to keep it organized. If you have an organized individual on your team, or you need to hire out that project management, please do it. It is to the benefit of your author. Now, maybe you're hiring a full in-house service that will take care of that for you. If not, please make that choice.
Yeah. I think I think in terms of respecting artistry, it's self-discipline for the artist to acknowledge those systems are going to get you where you need to go. Let's say that you have an amazing horse. You got the best horse in the world. It's like flowing mane, muscly. It pulls a wagon. If you don't hook it up to the harness, the tack, the restraint to pull, you're going to have like a lawn ornament that sits out in pasture and doesn't go anywhere. It might run sometimes, but it's not going to be where you necessarily can predict or want it to be. Having those systems in place, having the mechanisms where you can help organize someone who, let's be real, artists tend to be a little more disorganized. Squirrel, you're going to get to where you need to go. So through all of that, by the spring of 2024, we had a first draft. We had sort of the stamp of approval from most of our contributors. The feedback that would tend to help was kind of that Oreo sandwich of like, I really like this about it. This part feels weird, or the tone of
Mhm.
this feels weird. Overall, I'm really excited to see what you make. There were a couple of people who were like, what is this? I hate this. I hate you.
No, no one was that.
No, what does that mean? No, what was that mean? Everyone
That's
was
just,
super nice.
you have to understand, like, for everyone who gives and receives feedback, the person receiving the feedback, especially if they're newer to this process, like if you hire, it's like hiring a marketing assistant saying, hey, one of your early projects is to do a book for me. They are going to be very reactive to some of the feedback early on. So actually, that's a good point. If you are going to seek feedback, if you know who is receiving the feedback and you can set the tone for how that feedback should be delivered, very, very valuable to the creative
Yeah.
process.
Yeah, and so I think those pieces, and also the acknowledgement that you had a certain amount of street cred, your name, you knew these people, you'd worked with these people, you'd interviewed these people. I didn't. My name had
Right.
no sort of buy-in, and I was approaching these people saying, hey, here's this thing that you know Charley and I have put together. Let me know your thoughts. And so gradually stepping into that world, and I found things that started helping me the most was when I started connecting with some of these collaborators on places like LinkedIn. I started facilitating and trying to build my own kind of relationships
Yep.
with them. I remember like Tony Albrecht is such a saint, because there was a time on LinkedIn where I was in the midst of writing the book. I had just finished his chapter, really liked working on his chapter, and he sat and very candidly was like, how's it going? What have you learned from writing the book? I caught up with Charley. He talked about writing the book. He's really excited to be doing this with you. What have you learned? I'm thinking of writing a book. How, do you like it? What have you picked up? And those moments of clarity and process were game changers in getting my own buy-in and sort of cutting out that resistance of like, maybe I do fit in this more than I thought I did. So we wrote a first draft and we were like, great, we're done. And then the next chapter, which I kind of call the whack-a-mole of dropped balls, followed for the next
I look
year, which maybe is what we talk about in the next episode.
So the next episode, what we'll talk about is taking this project that was 80, 90% finished and dealing with the final portion of actually getting it published, what it means to get an ISBN number, to work with a publisher, to deal with grammar edits, the final little crossing the T's, dotting the I's, the marketing plan, the launch plan, what our objectives were, how we stumbled during the launch, what we succeeded on during the launch, and all that other fun stuff that I know people would love to learn about. But Bryan, I'm looking forward to that conversation, and maybe we'll still have some more creative stuff to talk about as well, my friend.
Let's do it. Let's take everything we learned and make something new.
Absolutely. And in the next episode of the show, we will do the what are you reading, watching, and listening to. So make sure you tune in as well, all the way to the very end to knock that out as well. And we'll see you all in the next episode of They Don't Teach This in Law School.